Lance for 5 minutes.
I rise today to celebrate the centennial of the birth of First Lady Patricia Nixon. The Nixon Library in Southern California will present a major exhibit about Mrs. Nixon's life opening March 16th. And the National Archives here in Washington will host a forum on Mrs. Nixon's work in the international arena in April. Thelma Catherine Ryan was born on the eve of St. Patrick's Day on March 16, 1912 in Ely, Nevada, a mining town. Her father, William Ryan, called her his St. Patrick's babe in the morn, so she was called Pat within hours of her birth. The Ryans moved to Southern California and settled on a small truck farm in Artesia near Los Angeles. Orphaned early, her mother, Kate Halberstad Bender Ryan, died in 1924, and her father in 1929, the year she was graduated from high school. A young person of tremendous courage and determination, Mrs. Nixon had her heart set on higher education and worked continually to secure the necessary funds. She drove an elderly couple to the East Coast and worked as an X-ray technician in New York. Returning west, she was graduated cum laude from the University of Southern California in 1937. While attending USC, she held part-time jobs on campus and was a department store sales clerk and a Hollywood extra, appearing in several motion pictures, including the 1935 film Becky Sharp. Mrs. Nixon taught at Whittier High School in the late 1930s, where she met her husband, who had returned to his hometown to practice law after graduating from Duke Law School. Patricia Ryan and Richard Nixon were married in 1940, and, as was true of so many couples their age, she worked here at home while her husband served in the military in World War II as a naval officer in the Pacific. Mrs. Nixon campaigned with her husband as he was elected to the House of Representatives in 1946 and 1948, and to the United States Senate in 1950. There is a charming photograph of the Nixons with their infant daughter, Tricia, taken at the tidal basin with the cherry blossoms in bloom in the spring of 1947. Julie, their younger daughter, was born the following year. With her husband's election as vice president on Dwight Eisenhower's ticket in 1952, Mrs. Nixon became the second lady of the land. The Nixons traveled extensively, including for more than 2 months in Asia and the Pacific in 1953, and to South America in 1958, where the couple demonstrated tremendous courage in Caracas while being attacked by a communist mob, and to the Soviet Union in 1959. Mrs. Nixon campaigned gallantly in 1960, returning to private life in California and then New York, and proudly held the Nixon family Bible when Richard Nixon was inaugurated the 37th president in 1969. During the presidential years, the First Lady was truly our ambassador of goodwill, visiting South Vietnam, an active combat zone in 1969, an earthquake-ravaged Peru in 1970, and China in the groundbreaking trip of 1972. Mrs. Nixon was responsible for the gift from the Chinese of the 2 giant pandas to the American people. She traveled to more than 80 countries and 5 continents during her life. As First Lady, Mrs. Nixon encouraged volunteer service, the spirit of people helping people. She added 600 paintings and antiques to the White House collection, illuminated the White House at night, and opened the White House gardens to the public. Mrs. Nixon's service to the nation extended over many years. Only Dolly Madison, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Hillary Clinton, among our First Ladies, have served the country as long as Patricia Nixon. Laid to rest in 1993 on the grounds of the Nixon Library at Yorba Linda, California, Mrs. Nixon's grave marker reads, "Even when people can't speak your language, they can tell if you have love in your heart." Patricia Ryan Nixon had love in her heart, and now, at her 100th birthday, we remember her for her devotion to family, her grace and perseverance, and her patriotism to the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Boswell, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today I stand before the 112th Congress to recognize and honor Mr. Stanley E. Peterson for his 40 years of service to the United States as an officer